Good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast, and those who are joining us out west. It's still morning, but good afternoon, and I want to welcome you to today's panel discussion, which we're deeply honored to be presenting. As you saw, the title is Willie, Creating Productive Conversations About Race, which clearly is a important topic as we sit here today. I'm Scott Carmichael. I'm the CEO of Prodigy Search. Such an important discussion that I said, the unfortunate events that have transpired over the past few weeks and clearly the last, hundreds of years, has led us to local, national, and global social justice reform. We need to dramatically change, our thinking and most importantly, our actions. And I know we're going to get into some of that discussion today for sure. Those of you familiar with Willie, the documentary, it was clearly intended to recognize the breaking of the color barrier in the National Hockey League that Willie O'Ree did in 1958 with the Boston Bruins, but also how Willie transcended hockey with his journey in pursuit of opportunity to blaze new trails and inspire people really of all races. Prodigy Search has been honored to be involved in the documentary for just about 2 years now. Bryant McBride, longtime friend of mine. Bryant and I worked at the National Hockey League in the mid to late 90s. Frank Nakano, who you'll hear from in a minute, also, we all worked together at the NHL, and Bryant came to myself and asked for Prodigy's involvement. It was I don't think I answered yes quick enough. It was a deep honor, and we've been very, very honored, privileged to be a supporter of Willie, and we'll clearly hear about, for those who aren't familiar, the aspects of Willie. From a Prodigy Search perspective, and I'll just tell you the important core value, one of our key core values here in our recruiting business is clearly to provide opportunities in sport and entertainment for diverse candidates. We clearly have a lot more to do. We're focused on it. But over the last decade, about 30% of our placements and candidates have been diverse. So diversity and inclusion, people of color, people of gender, of all male and female, have been an important aspect of what we do at Prodigy Search. Before we get started, I want to let you know we're recording today's session, and we'll have it available on Prodigy Search's YouTube channel. There's also the bottom of your screen, which I'm sure many, if not all, you're familiar with. There's a Q&A button. We encourage you to send questions in. You won't see them on the screen, but we have people behind the scenes going through those, and we'll have Anson Carter direct those at the back end of the discussion. I want to introduce to you the privileged panel we put together today, which, again, we're extremely honored. We have Anson Carter, and many of you know Anson. He's currently the analyst for NBC Sports and MSG Networks, played in the NHL for 10 years. Wayne Simmonds, current NHL player with the Boston Sabres and Buffalo Sabres, and a 12-year NHL veteran. Bryant McBride, who's, again, longtime friend and producer of Willie. Dave Alward, who's the Canadian Consul General to New England, and also a big supporter of Willie, and you'll hear from him in a minute. And Frank Nakano, again, former NHL colleague of Bryant's and mine, and currently the Managing Director of Sports Entertainment of JP Morgan Chase. So privileged to have a terrific panel. I'm going to step aside. I'm going to introduce and have Anson Carter take over, and look forward to the discussion. Anson?
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And I want to thank you again with Prodigy Search for being involved with the documentary. As you mentioned, you guys are so influential with placing executives in the C-suite. And I really believe, like everyone else in this panel, that change happens at the top. And it's really important to have people like yourself and Prodigy Search to be in alignment with how we see the world and how we see culture. So we definitely, I want to thank you again on behalf of the rest of the panelists. Let's get right back into it. And I want to talk to Bryant. Bryant, you're the first Black executive of the National Hockey League. You were a producer of this film. What exactly did you do? And take us through the steps, because this film really came together rather quickly for you.
Sure. I had the honor of being one of Gary Bettman's first hires many years ago, 91, and worked hard there to grow the game in many different ways. But one way that was of particular importance to me was, I grew up playing hockey in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, and never had a teammate of color, and knew who Willie O'Ree was growing up through some friends. I was able to find him. I knew he was still in California. We found Willie, and I met him, and that it literally, it was a window into what an incredible guy he is. Willie is one of the most gracious, earnest, amazing people you'll ever meet. And that's at the root of everything that we're going to talk about today, is how he navigated a really difficult situation from making it into the NHL and then all of his years afterwards. So I was at the league for 10 years, left and went out on my own and started to build companies, and that's what I continue to do. But Willie invited myself and my family to the Boston Garden for the 60th anniversary of his first game 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now. And, the commissioner and others were in the box, and it really struck me. Willie was 82 when that event took place. It really struck me that, he needed to be in the Hall of Fame, and for a bunch of reasons, not necessarily as a player, but we had to affect that and help him navigate that, because it's very hard to do. And so the commissioner can't impact that, but we started to work on it. And then we found out there was an amazing group of allies, and I'll come back to that, in New Brunswick, in his hometown, led by Brenda and David Sansom and Bill Hunt and some amazing people in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Willie's hometown. Put our efforts together, and we started down that path. About a third of the way through that, I have a place in New York City. My neighbor, it's important to get to know your neighbors. My next door neighbor, Laurence Mathieu Leger, an amazing, truly amazing investigative journalist. She's just a brilliant, brilliant woman. And I told her the story. I told her Willie's story, sitting on my front steps in Harlem. And she said immediately, she lit the spark, that created this. She said, we have to make this film. I'd never made a film before, always wanted to, but she said, we have to make this, and that's what really started it.
Well, and a lot of times we talk about this film being a social justice film, kind of masquerading as a hockey movie. Why is that?
Well, it felt it was important, felt it was really important to discuss Willie's journey, his full journey. To talk about his hockey career, I think would have been incomplete. He had to go through so much. He had to figure out so much, just as so many people have had to figure out so much and navigate a terrain that is, imbued with racism throughout. It's just, I'm just going to be really direct in this conversation. It has been built with intent. The system through which we all live under, that has really risen to the fore in the last few weeks, but it's been persistent for a very long time. And the only way to undo something that's built with intent is to bring intent to that effort, to do the work. And we felt that this could serve as a tool that scaled. I'm in the business of making companies scale. It could be built in a way that it could be used as a tool to teach, to begin conversations about race, because those conversations are often uncomfortable, they're often difficult. So we wanted to take subject matter, sports, and particularly to put a tool in the hands of educators, be it in a formal setting in a classroom or be it at the dinner table, to be able to openly discuss race. That was the impetus behind it.
And Frank, you heard Bryant talking about the system. A lot of times you hear people talking about systematic racism and they talk about banks. But with yourself and JP Morgan Chase, you were the first big investor in this project, and you really allowed this project to get off the ground. Why was it important for yourself and JP Morgan Chase to get involved in the Willie documentary?
Yeah, so, as Bryant called me and we were talking through it, I think it struck me both. I had familiarity with both, of course, Bryant, but also having met Willie during my time at the league. So it was a pretty easy decision. It was a great story that, as I was getting a peek into the storylines that Bryant and Laurent were uncovering, that just needed to be told. It was an incredible story. I felt, as a hockey fan, more embarrassed that I didn't know the full story, and even after working with Willie for those years. But the program and his approach, and he's instrumental in things that are going on today that you see in your communities. I mean, here in New York, the ice hockey in Harlem program, the street lightning in Tampa, wouldn't really have existed had it not been for Willie. So There was twofold. It was the story, unbelievable story that needed to be told, his journey, how he handled himself. He tells incredible stories of, I can't imagine going through what he went through to get to where he was. His journey to the ultimately in the Hall of Fame, which was an amazing to see it and be part of that night. And then certainly, I think you said it in the beginning, it's a great story that had so many different angles to it. We're in the business of, right, the intersection of culture and passion and entertainment through sport, and it checked off all the boxes, as well as being a very important topic that we're addressing today.
And I talked earlier with Scott and Prodigy Search being instrumental with getting minorities placed in the executive roles, and with yourself being an executive there at JP Morgan Chase. Was it difficult to have people see what you saw as the value of this film, or did people jump on board right away?
Yeah, not at all. I think as a firm, I know, as you alluded to, we're sometimes in the center of the storm on a lot of these issues, but I think from the top down, we have a long history of supporting initiatives, communities. In fact, Bryant was a guest down in DC recently for the anniversary of an initiative called Advancing Black Pathways that we've started through the firm. And I'm not doing it justice, but it really is very direct in opening opportunities for people of color through, fighting through opportunities. It's really a lack of opportunity, right? So comes in different channels. We're focused on education, wealth management, and creating opportunity. So long-winded answer to your question, Anson, but it was not difficult at all. Everyone was very supportive from the get-go.
That's good to hear. And David, Bryant talked about yourself and Willie's home province, New Brunswick. You're the former premier of New Brunswick. How was Willie received? Is he seen as a hero back in his home province, back in Canada?
Oh, is he ever? Look, as Bryant talked about earlier, he's an incredible human being. It begins with that. He's so gracious, so humble, and it's amazing for me. I've had a chance to know Willie for a number of years, but you go to an event where there are children, and they're drawn to him, and he has had a wonderful impact in our community. There are very few rinks in New Brunswick named after individuals. But, one of the rinks in Fredericton, his hometown, is named after him because of the impact that he's had on our community, greater New Brunswick community, but right around the world. And for, New Brunswickers as great followers of both hockey and baseball, which he was a terrific athlete, he's reached many of us right across our nation. And if you look at what he's been able to do with certainly his work on behalf of the NHL community, but really, really importantly, connecting people to each other, I think has been tremendous over the last number of years.
Some of Willie's best friends in the documentary were white, and we talk about allyship being so important to getting anything accomplished today. As Black people, we can't do anything on our own. We need to have other races get involved in the conversation, and you're a tremendous ally to this project and this documentary. You connected Bryant and the team to the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. What made you stick your neck on the line? Because we all understand relationships are so important, to reach out to the Prime Minister of Canada and say, hey, we'd like to get you involved in this documentary.
Well, look, if we think about what this documentary is all about, and as Canadians, we like to think of ourselves as an open, inclusive nation that values diversity, that values different cultures. Unfortunately, since the beginnings of our history, we failed at that in so many ways, and the Prime Minister has worked very hard to help Canadians recognize that systemic racism still exists in Canada today, and that Black Canadians, Indigenous peoples, people of religious minorities, the LGBTQ community, and others still deal with issues every day. And so the ability to use a tool like Willie as the documentary in the curriculum, again, to begin at the earliest stages with children, especially to really change how people think and how our society thinks. It was a great opportunity, and the Prime Minister, they were terrific, and they were so welcoming, and he was so honored to be able to welcome Willie as well through that time.
That's amazing. And Wayne, you're a current player. You're still in the league. Like Scott had mentioned in the intro, 12-year NHL vet. Your All-Star Game MVP 2017. These are some of the things that I never thought would be possible when I played the game in the league. So I've seen how the game has changed over the course of time. I'm curious to hear what your take was on the first time you saw Willie documentary.
I thought it was great, actually. When I was younger growing up, I think the first thing my parents did once I realized I wanted to play hockey was, they told me I had to study Willie O'Ree. So that's what I did. I studied Willie O'Ree, and I got to know, about his life and what he went through. And watching that documentary, it was unbelievable to see the things that he went through. I think the fact that he has relationships that have spanned over 70 years with individuals, I think that shows you just how great of a human being he actually is. And just the adversity that he went through, being the first Black player in the NHL in 1958. Growing up, learning about all that, just gave me chills and wanted, and made me want to be like him, to, advance, the talks about racism in hockey and kind of grow up in Willie's footsteps. And, I think in watching the movie, there were two things that, stuck out to me. I felt that were extremely important. I think, first of all, he made the NHL when it was the original 6. There was only 6 teams. And not to mention, he only had one good eye. For anybody to be able to play in the NHL at that time with one good eye is remarkable, never mind being Black in 1958. So that was incredible. And then I think the second thing that stuck out to me the most, the perseverance of Willie. And I watched the movie, and it said he was trying to have an all-star game, like the Willie O'Ree all-star game, where he brought, kids of color and, underprivileged kids, to arenas to be treated like all-stars, for a weekend. And just for that to happen, he got, I think it was 2 letters they said. The first one was a bomb threat, saying, we're going to blow up this arena, and, the blood of the children are going to be on your hands. Like, why? Just because he's a Black man trying to help out, advance hockey. So to me, I think those were the 2 most powerful things I took from that film. But, it was an amazing watch for sure.
You're one of the leaders in your team. You're one of the leaders in the league. I was just named to the Players Inclusion Committee, and our 3 goals we're trying to, focus on are like barriers to entry. We're trying to think about improving and ways to build allyship, and also trying to grow the game. Now, you've been named to the Hockey Alliance, and kind of explain to us and take us through what the purpose of that group is and what you guys plan on achieving going forward.
Okay, so in the Hockey Diversity Alliance, I think obviously we have Black players, but we have different players of different ethnicities, because we realize in hockey, it's mainly a white sport. So we want to be able to make it comfortable for everybody to come to a rink, whether they're Black, white, Asian, brown, man or a woman. It doesn't matter. You should be able to be comfortable in an arena. And I think, our first goal, we want to, educate the hockey community around racism. I think you hear a lot of, oh, I can't believe that happened, or this still happens, it's 2020. So for me, being a Black hockey player, I would say, yeah, this stuff happens all the time. Although Willie did go through a lot more than we go through today, it's still really prevalent in the game. I think a lot of stuff gets swept under the rug, and no one really wants to talk about it. I heard Bryant say earlier that it's tough. That's going to be tough conversations that we need to have, and to bring this to light. We all know it's going to be tough, but we just got to be willing to talk about it. Obviously, with this HDA as well, we want to make sure that the kids are taken care of, the youth. And, our main goal is to hopefully change some policies within youth hockey to where, kids feel comfortable and they're allowed to be themselves. They're allowed to just go into the rink and not worry about anything else, not worry about being called names or, being singled out. Because a lot of those kids that go in there, players of color, they have nowhere else to look to. They don't have, players that look like them. They go home at night, and sometimes the only people they have to talk to is their parents. So we feel that it's extremely important that, we share our experiences with the youth so that they know that they're not the only ones who have gone through this, and that, we're right there beside them and we're helping them, we're coaching them, and we're trying to change things for the better of the game so that, obviously we don't want these things to happen. We realize it's not going to be overnight, but, slowly we can chip away and chip away and chip away at this and, make hockey a game that truly is for everybody.
I agree with you. I mean, these conversations aren't going to be easy. I always try to compare it to running a marathon. You train for a marathon. I know Bryant runs a lot of marathons, or he used to, at least in his younger days. But when you're training for a marathon, it's not easy. The first time you try to run 5 or 10 miles, your body's sore, you're achy, you're tired, you need to get that rub down afterwards. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And I feel like having these conversations with people are going to be tough and painful at first when you rip the scab off. But over time, as we become more comfortable having these conversations, they'll become easier and easier. But Bryant, I want to talk, you touched on something a little bit earlier with Laurence. A big theme in this movie is diversity and inclusion. And Laurence, brilliant filmmaker, or investigative reporter. Take me through and take the audience here through why you chose Laurence to direct this film, and also what kind of impact she had on the direction of the film.
Yeah, it wasn't so much as I chose Laurence as she chose us. She's been a big part of my journey. I grew up in Canada, moved to the States to go to college, and so it's been an incredible journey the last 2-3 years, and just kind of understanding all of the issues that are out there. And she's really attuned to those issues, and she's really nuanced and really smart about how she presents them. Wayne said earlier, mentioned the 70-year relationships that Willie has, and he has it with a really wonderful man named Junior Doherty, who's in the film and is really one of Willie's dearest, if not his best friend. And white allyship is in vogue right now, right? Okay, and but Junior was a white ally in the 1940s. I mean, think about that. And he went through an incredible amount as he stuck by the side of his friend and just refused to bend to anyone else's thoughts. So Laurence highlighting that I thought was brilliant. The role of David and Brenda Sansom, brilliant, and they're brilliant people. I mean, they're just inspirational, wonderful people that I just can't say enough about what they did behind the scenes. Moreover, the role of young people in the film, taking Willie's experience and juxtaposing it to Sidney Kinder and Kelsey Colzer and the LeBlanc brothers, and hearing that they too in 2018, 2019 are still being called names on the ice, right? This hasn't ended. And then to take that and bring it all the way back to Willie's family history, when we went to South Carolina to those archives, and she dug in and found Willie's path that he didn't know and his family didn't know. So, all of those, weaving all of those threads together is just masterful. And she did it in such a nuanced, smart way that leads to conversations, that facilitates these hard conversations. We're in the anger phase right now. Okay. Everyone's in the anger. Everyone can't believe what they saw with their own eyes. Right. And so that's going to continue for a while, and it's right to be angry. And what it means, though, is that it's got to lead somewhere. And what it leads to is work, right? This is hard work. It's in the cracks and crevices of every part of our society. Racism is. So removing it is diligent, hard work. And if we made a small contribution to that, then we were hopefully successful.
And I want to add to that too with Laurence, because I know her as very well as traveling with the film with you guys as the moderator. It was totally unscripted. You know, it's easy to direct a project when you have a script in front of you. But the fact that she was able to take all this information, weave it all together, like you said, I mean, that's a very tough thing to do, because even in Hollywood, you could give the 10 different directors exactly the same script, and you'll have 10 different pictures that'll come out of that. So what she was able to do there really highlights how brilliant Laurence was, the filmmaker. You know, on the call that we had a few days ago, you talked a little bit about positive deviance. You want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this goes right to the work that is ahead of all of us, everyone on this panel, everyone watching this panel, everyone in society, right? If we're going to really take this seriously and we're going to move forward in a constructive way. Really smart article in a journal recently created by, written by a smart doctoral, just newly minted doctoral student. She wrote about something called positive deviance, meaning in a positive way to deviate from the norm. You're in a setting, like Wayne suggested, you're in a setting where someone's in the stands or in a locker room or at a game in the heat of the moment, and somebody says something that's just really not, it's something that's inappropriate, right? And it's just not right. Often people will stand there and look and not say anything because they don't want to add to it. Well, you can deviate from that norm positively. You can say and be equipped and have the tools to say, you know what, not acceptable here. Take your opinions elsewhere. First, they're wrong and it's not appropriate. And so that's in a workplace setting, that's in a play setting, anywhere for people to speak up. And I think that's one of the threads that's running through all the protests right now. Everything that's happening in the world is silence means you're complicit, right? Kids, especially. I've learned so much from my kids. They're 22, 16, and 14 right now. I've learned so much from them in the last 2 weeks, and they have really emphasized that people who sit on the sidelines, it's not acceptable anymore. So that is a positive deviation is just one of many tools that can be used. The other, of course, and it all falls under the umbrella of education. David and Frank and Wayne have mentioned it. Got to start with just an understanding. Right? Canada went through it, and they had the guts from 2007 to 2015 to address head-on the Indigenous, the practice that was directed towards the Indigenous people of Canada, towards the Indian resettlement schools, which was just an awful chapter in their history. They talked about it. If you want to see something powerful, go to YouTube and Google that. And watch kids talk about learning about their ancestors, and listen to Ted Nolan talk about it. I mean, we're talking a lot about Black Lives Matter right now, but the Indigenous people, what they've gone through, this is a big tent that has hurt a lot of people. So it's going to take a lot of people to solve it, but we hopefully have made a beginning.
It seems like you hijacked my notes, sir, because I was going to ask David about that. The Indigenous people there in Canada. Having that experience working in government for years, how have those perceptions or how have those relationships changed, or are they changing right now?
Well, I certainly hope that they're changing. I think what Bryant just said is it's a lot of hard work. The first important thing from the highest levels in Canada is there's been a recognition of the past, of the wrongs that have happened. And it began with work, it's began a number of years ago, but certainly with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission work that took place between 2007 and 15, but really followed through and followed forward with the National Inquiry on murdered and missing women and girls. The work that has gone on by Canada accepting the UN rights of Indigenous peoples and putting in place our anti-racism strategy that really involves the federal government providing national leadership coordinating and digging down into where does systemic racism happen and what do we need to change it. Really important, engaging communities and investing with communities and building capacity. And then the third part of it, so importantly, and we think of Willie in so many ways here, is that education piece where we help people understand what the what the impacts of racism are, and why it is so important for all Canadians that we have an inclusive nation. And ultimately what that will do as we lift everybody up. If we look and going back to that conscious intent for each of us, ultimately in our own everyday lives, whether it is at a ball game and hearing something, or at a hockey game, whether it's at our own work, but within our systems of influence, I think ultimately that's how we're going to make a lot of change, along with really getting to the heart of our children and helping them initiate change as they go forward as well.
And David, Canadians typically aren't confrontational people. You know, I'm a dual citizen, Canadian and American, so I see both sides of the fence here. But do you think people in Canada are paying attention to what's happening here in the U.S. and saying, you know, if they could do it there in the States, we could do the same thing here in Canada?
Oh, I know that it's going on in Canada, and again, you know, we listen to the highest levels of government right now with their comments, their statements. We've seen initiatives take place right across the country. So the world is watching right now, and I think this is a real opportunity for all of us to have an impact in our own way that we possibly can. And again, we'll you know, thinking about the work that Willie has done as an ambassador of diversity with the NHL, and ultimately what the documentary is trying to get to. I think there's a point in time in our history where we can make a difference right now.
And Frank, you just heard David talk about initiatives. Sports is probably one of the first things that really fully integrated athletes of all different colors. Is this something that you see JP Morgan Chase diving into even deeper? I know in New York, you can't walk around Madison Square Garden without seeing JP Morgan Chase signage all over the arena. Is this something that you guys are making an effort into doing more of going forward?
Yeah, no, it's a great question for sure. Yes. And we've been talking a lot about this of late, and feel like we have a responsibility as we sit in the intersection of the conversation. And we've always relied on sports in the past to bring people together, conversations together. But I think we need to do an even better job of bringing this conversation in particular to a head, because of the importance that it, and the mind share that it does take up with customers and people and conversations. And it's just such an odd, candidly, right, situation where the best players in given league are of color, but yet this conversation still exists. And it sort of pains me when you hear, you know, Wayne talk about, you know, having go through this currently in the situation, right? Where so, and can only imagine as it goes on with kids. Again, trash talking is one thing, but when you're crossing the lines, and I think we need to raise that conversation to talk about it more socially.
Yeah, and you mentioned Wayne just now. Wayne, like I said, I'm so jealous of the fact you're playing the NHL now, because the game has changed so much. I remember back when I played, a general manager asked me to cut my hair. Like, you wouldn't know now, I don't have locks, but you know, I'm trying to keep it professional right now. Like, actually not right now, because I haven't had a haircut in forever and I haven't shaved because I'm staying at home. But a general manager asked me to cut my hair, and I looked at him saying, okay, I'll get right on that. And if you guys know, if you check out my hockey cards, I always had dreads. So I clearly didn't pay attention to what he was saying. And I told my parents about this too. I said, you think Joe Thornton was asked to cut his hair? Or Jaromir Jagr? Or Ryan Smith? Or Wayne Gretzky? Like, hockey flow was a thing. So you can't ask me to cut my hair and have all these other guys be okay with it. So Wayne, you're very fortunate to be playing in the era that you're playing in. I'm jealous, but I want to talk about the astronaut article. I mean, why is that important? And, you know, what information can you pull out of that to share with us?
So to me, that article is extremely important, because I think it kind of illustrates what's going on in the game today. I wrote that article in 2018 in hopes that, you know, it would help Mr. O'Reed get into the Hockey Hall of Fame and kind of illustrate, you know, the battles that he's faced throughout his whole career. But at the same time, let everybody know that even though Willie faced this in 1958, it's 2018 and these things are still happening. So I kind of, I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention because, like I said, I feel like, as a black player, playing in the NHL, a lot of things that happen to us players of color, like people don't even pay attention to, it kind of gets swept away. Like it's here 1 minute, but the next minute it's gone. And I really want to drive home the point that, these things still happen. And even though Willie went through these things back then, we're still facing these things today. And it was extremely important for me to get my message out there, to help, that education process to where now nobody can come to me and tell me, oh, well, I didn't believe these things happened in hockey anymore, because now they're right in your face. I'm telling you, like, this is what I've experienced. And those are only a few stories. I've had a lot more things happen to me, after that, before that. And to me, I think this is the greatest game in the world. And I think it should be an all-inclusive game. And no one should ever have to ask you or tell you to cut your dreads off because you look different than anybody else. There's no reason in the world why, we should be held to a different standard, than the white hockey player. This to me is extremely important. And to make this game more comfortable and all inclusive for the kids coming behind us, I just, I thought it was an important message, to get out there.
And there's a powerful statement you were to make. Like, hockey players don't typically step out and say things like you said. Did you receive any pushback from anybody when you put that article out there?
To be honest, I don't pay attention to that. My mom taught me well when I was a young kid. She said, just don't pay attention to all the haters, do what you're going to do. And always give back to the community who gave to you. The hockey community gave back to me, in a good way. So I'm always going to go out there and, support players who look like me, even if you don't look like me. I'm in it, to grow, the NHL, to grow grassroots hockey. And whatever way I can do that, whether that's sharing my personal stories or being a part of the HDA to where now we actually could have a say in what's happening, in our sport, I'm going to do whatever it takes to, to illustrate that point and get it out there and to make it better.
Well, you just mentioned something that I think is very important when you said your mom taught you well, and it really starts at home. When I was growing up and I played minor hockey, when I had other kids call me the N-word and racial slurs, it didn't really faze me at all. It really didn't. I mean, I went out there and scored more goals. I scored 5 or 10 goals. It didn't faze me. But when I heard the parents leaning over the glass or the coaches yelling at me or people throwing bananas at me, they're adults, that's when it had the greater impact, because my parents always taught me that kids are going to be idiots. They're ignorant sometimes. They don't know any better, but adults should know better. And that's why it's important that I had my little kids, for example, in the social video I just put out, and strength, and union their strength. It was important to have all these different faces in there, and even my kids in there too, because I want people to understand that my daughters are 12 and 14, and they're never too young to have these conversations. Like, it's so important to have these conversations when your kids are young, because you don't wait until they're 30 and 40 years old. Everyone's set in their ways by that time. When they're young, they're impressionable. That's when you can make the greatest impact on what they're thinking and how they treat people going forward.
To that, Anson, if I may, I want to underline a few things. It gets you a little bit of the way when you ask people to educate themselves. It gets you further if you actually give them the tools. For everyone listening, if you haven't read Wayne's article, The Astronaut, it's one of the best pieces of writing. I read a lot, and it's one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read. I mean, I got emotional reading it. So read that. Okay, we purposefully had this panel the day before Juneteenth. Understand what Juneteenth is. Okay, my kids and others are sick of me saying it, but obviously watch the movie, watch Willie. You can find it on iTunes and Amazon, and it'll be in other places shortly. But read 4 books. There's 4 books that I think are really great building blocks. The New Jim Crow, The Warmth of Other Suns, The Color of Law, okay, and really importantly, Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. those books will really give you the building blocks, a beginning to be able to build on, to teach your kids, to have your kids read them. And there's lots of other great stuff out there. It's really coming to the fore now, but dig in. That's the beginnings of the work that will keep, people like Anson was discussing and mentioning from doing stuff that is just, it's incomprehensible, but it'll hopefully give them a basis upon which to go forward and be empathetic and understanding that they want their kids to be treated a certain way so that they treat other kids a certain way, right? So those are, I hope, tangible. That article that I mentioned earlier about positive deviation, those are tangible things. They're all a Google search away. So take the time.
We're going to start opening up the floor to Q&A, but quickly before I get to that, I haven't gotten to Frank and David about their thoughts in the film. And after watching the film, what did you take away from it? So maybe Frank first.
Sure. I think there was a quote at one point when Willie's talking about his journey, and he said, I never challenged or fought anybody because of something they said racially. It was only sort of a hockey infraction. Otherwise, I would never be able to stay on the ice, which is sort of, to me, summarized how he must have had to just put blinders on and just charge forward with his greater vision and goal. I can't say that I would have the same strength, willpower to do something like that, but it was sad as well as inspiring at the same time. But to me, that encapsulated sort of his journey and how he would approach it. And then certainly having met him, understanding sort of the sort of gentle giant within, but he could still crush you at his age now, right? With his internal strength and fortitude. So to me, that was one of the sort of defining moments of the film.
Frank, I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. I mean, you're a minority to major bank, and you've elevated yourself to a high level in that bank. So I think you do have that internal fortitude, the same thing that Willie had. So you can't sell yourself short. You must be Canadian. I don't know.
No.
But David,
Canadian in spirit.
Right.
Just I guess for me as a New Brunswicker, incredibly proud of what Willie accomplished and what the community in many ways surrounded him. The friends, the advocates within the community, that was a very special part. But him going back to his roots, to the Carolinas, and the journey. And as we're around Juneteenth and think about what took place, what brought his family to Fredericton, to begin with, but really that deep-rooted racism that we're still fighting today, but people overcoming it. And I think that is his incredible graciousness and humility and perseverance for me is just something that's hard to imagine. I don't know if I would be as gracious with what he had to deal with over the years.
Okay. Well, we're going to open up for questions right now. We've got a question from Jeffrey, who is a white parent of a black player. And, Wayne, what's your message to an 18-year-old black hockey player about staying strong now amongst the recent racial unrest?
I'd say obviously you got to keep your head on straight and, focus on what you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, I think you take into account what's going on in the world and you let it be known that you're not going to stand for this. But at the same time, I think you got to make sure that you're focused and that, no one's going to be able to knock your mentality down or change the way that you're thinking. So I would just say keep doing your thing and, don't let anybody outwork you. Don't let anybody tell you you're not in the spot you're supposed to be in, and you just continue to strive and work hard.
Okay, and question from Alexandria. Some black parents don't even consider hockey as an option for their children, only basketball and football. What recommendations do you have to reach the parents who don't consider hockey as an option for their children?
I would say allow your child to just experience the game. Obviously, my dad wanted me to play baseball when I was younger. But, he also took me skating at the same time. So once I picked up a hockey stick and, I experienced it, it was just something that, I never wanted to put down. I just the love for the game grew so immense. And I think that by diversifying our game and allowing or getting hockey sticks in the hands of children that would never otherwise, have the opportunity, I think that it'll do wonders for the sport. And, we could definitely create some stud hockey players. I know that for sure.
I would add to that, Anson. I think hockey is particularly important for the Black community and for all communities, mostly because it's hard, right? The first thing you learn, if I could only have my kids learn one thing in life, if I could only give them one more piece of advice, that is to get back up when they get knocked down, to be resilient, right? And the first thing you learn when you're 4, 5, 7, 6 years old, when you fall on your butt, which you inevitably do because no one is born with skates on, is you learn to get back up. It is the primary thing you learn at the beginning of trying this sport. So that is a muscle, right? Hockey's hard. And I'm in the rink every Saturday morning, for the last 18 years coaching my kids, and I still am. And watching that progression and that muscle of I can figure this out, and then developing that over a period of time, it is transferable. It's really important. It's transferable to other things, to math, to science, to whatever other difficulty they're going to face, which there will be many, right? Building that muscle early is so important in hockey. I don't know of a better way to do it than hockey. It's really important.
And that was Willie's original mission, Bryant, wasn't it? One of his visions was bringing it to people who would not be exposed to it.
Exactly.
And like he says all the time, he thought of himself more of it as a poor player growing up, not as a Black poor player growing up. He was fortunate to have some access to the game. So I think Wayne and Anson and Bryant, as the league starts to develop their diversity programming, it's something that we should continue this conversation and figure out how we, wrangle the resources of everyone that's on this call, that's tuning into this to help develop those community platforms.
Well, Frank, how important is the visibility of Willie and his story in the movie to help drive that change?
Yeah, I think very important, right? I mean, I think that the fact that he did it certainly helps. The passion with which he talks about it, and the pure joy when you see him talk, out with kids and teaching the game and introducing the game. It's hard though, because the league for years, I mean, dating back to all of our collective times at the league, it's all about growing the game. It's certainly not easy, but I think anything certainly in life, if it was easy, someone else would have done it, right?
Mm-hmm. David, I want to ask you, what are the first next things we can do now as an industry to positively and meaningfully advance opportunity and understanding?
Well, and I guess I think Bryant and others and Anson and Wayne are better positioned to talk specifically about the industry. But I think from a government perspective, I think leadership needs to happen from the very highest levels, and there needs to be intention in decisions that are taken. So helping ensure that communities have the resources to build capacity is a hugely important part of what is taking place. Helping support and ensure that education, helping the communities know and understand what opportunities are there, I think is a hugely important part. So really acting as a facilitator and bringing others to the table from a, specifically from a government perspective, but from a hockey and love of the game point of view, it doesn't matter the color of your skin or your gender. What matters whether or not you want to experience the game, and so how do we provide those opportunities on a go forward? And one of the things for me that's been pretty amazing is to watch people in the game who have succeeded give back to help spread the game. And we look at what's going on around the world right now. You know, access to hockey in places that we never would have thought would have had those opportunities, which is pretty cool. And that's because people in the game who have succeeded in many ways are contributing back. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and to add on what the guys were saying before with hockey, it teaches you how to learn how to lose also. Like Bryant was talking about getting up and falling down. Well, there's a lot of lessons you can learn from losing, not just winning, and how you deal with teammates while you lose, how you put your head down and you grind because you want to win after that. And that's one of the biggest things I took away from the game of hockey was learning how to lose and being a better teammate. Those are important values that you learn from sports that you could take with any other industry, whether it's government or banking or technology or what have you, consulting. But we have another question right here from Brian. He's a coach. He coaches a diverse group of players who've experienced a lot of challenges from other teams and coaches. What do you guys think that could be done to make sure this stuff doesn't happen? I'll give you my point of view with Hockey Canada and USA Hockey. We have to come down hard. I'm all about zero tolerance. If anything's being said with a child in particular, a minor, well, maybe you suspend that kid for the full season, but you give him an opportunity to come back the following year because everyone makes mistakes, but you want to have severe enough penalty to understand, for these kids to understand that this isn't acceptable. And as for parents, I'm all for lifetime bans. You know, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if a parent of a child says something or a coach says something and their child plays in that team or that league, that kid's gone too. There needs to be hard lessons to be learned here where people have to understand racism isn't a place for racist people. Hockey isn't a place for racist people to hang their hat. I mean, do you guys have any other points to add to that? Do you guys agree or disagree?
I 100% agree. You know, there's two sides of it. There's the educational side of it, and there's the carrot and the stick, right? And then there's the punishment. The punishment side, which you just addressed, Anson, I 100% agree. USA Hockey has taken some steps in that direction, and I applaud them for that. There's further to go, right? If I hear one more kid, a story of another kid being called names on the, the N-word on the ice, my head's going to explode. I mean, zero tolerance, guys. We're so far past that. Enough. That needs to be addressed. It's got to be addressed carefully and thoughtfully, but it's one of those situations where, if a kid comes off the ice or a kid says that he or she has been called a name, right? And we've talked a lot about, we've used the pronoun he a lot. I mean, women are a huge part of this. And the level at which they're playing now and the numbers are just exploding. So this is about our daughters and our sisters and moms as well. So, it's just not acceptable to hear that anymore, okay? You saw this week the NASCAR banned the Confederate flag, okay? Being called a name on the ice is hockey's Confederate flag, okay? Enough already. And so that's on the punishment side. On the educational side, there's some great work being done around the hockey world right now. And we're talking to a lot of those people about how that can be infused in the game, but with a particular emphasis on outcomes, right? When somebody hears, the phrase, "Oh, don't be a racist," or they hear something about racism, "Oh, that's not me," right? Well, we all have it, guys. We all do. Let's be really reflective and honest with ourselves. The Me Too movement roared. I think there's so many parallels there. It roared its head the last couple of years, but it's been going on forever and it's still going on, right? Because people don't see themselves as sexist. But we all have inherent biases that we really have to explore and be thoughtful about before we proceed in a constructive way. So the educational elements of how we stop that combined with the punishment is the formula that we're looking for. But those educational pieces have to be about outcomes, because if there aren't outcomes, we're talking to ourselves and we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, Wayne, you've had a couple incidences when people have said things you were threw bananas at you on the ice. How did you deal with it? And how would you tell young people if they're tuning into this, or even parents that have children at home that play hockey, how would you help them deal with that?
I think for me, the way I dealt with it, so the incident where I had the banana thrown at me, it was actually in London, Ontario. and I was it was during a shootout. I saw it flash right before my eyes. I actually didn't really know what it was. Just wanted to keep my concentration, and I went and I ended up scoring, and I kind of did a double back, and I figured out what it was, and after that I kind of just went numb. Couldn't believe it, but at the same time I could believe it. So for me, dealing with a situation like that, it was weird. I think, being questioned by the media and having everyone ask me questions about it and trying to explain it to people I knew that wouldn't completely get what I was saying, it kind of made me feel, out of place a bit. But at the same time, I knew in my mind that, I'm a strong enough person. I've dealt with this my whole life. And the only thing, that came to mind was, I didn't actually want to speak too much about it. I didn't want to give that person gratification to let them know that it actually got to me. So I kind of just kept moving forward and, continued with what I was doing. Honestly, now that I look back, I wish I had spoke out and said more at that time. But it is what it is. But in dealing with that for other kids, I would say, first of all, don't let it take your focus away. That's the main goal of someone that's being racist against you. They want to take you off the ice. They want to take your focus away. They don't want you to be able to hurt them on the scoreboard. They want to take you completely out of that game. So just keep doing your thing. Put a couple pucks in the back of the net, like Anson said, score 5 or 10 goals, win that game, and that person feels shame. There's no other way for me to put it. That person's going to feel like an idiot. They showed themselves, and you proved to them that you weren't small-minded, and you could take it.
So to Wayne's point, I want to add one thing that's very specific. Okay, this was just texted to me by a colleague and friend for many years, Stephanie Gayositz, who's worked on this. She worked for me at the NHL years ago, wrote her thesis at Harvard about the diversity efforts 20 years ago. Okay, and I had the chance to read it last night again, and we're talking about the same things as 20 years ago. She wrote it in 98, right? And even longer now. And to Wayne's example, one of the key things that what we can do as a sport and an industry is simply empower the bystander. The person who threw the banana in Wayne's situation, he or she should have just been besieged with, what are you doing? Seriously? Right? So empowering those people around to speak up is a first really tangible, powerful step to take.
Well, I'd even say not just in that situation, because I could just apply everything that we're talking about to real world, and I'll go back to that social video I put together. Absolutely. Hockey players, and Wayne can speak to this too, typically don't speak out on our own. And that was one of the big reasons why I put that video together with all these individuals, like powerful individuals. And I could have went on and on, but I wanted to keep the video only to a minute because for social media purposes. But it was an opportunity for people to get together and say something as a group. Hockey's the ultimate team sport. So we weren't going to single out any other player. We want everyone to come together. And there's a reason why I put people's names on the video, because in case you weren't a hockey fan and you didn't know who those people were, you could go ahead and look them up and Google them. You could see Wayne Simmonds, 2017 All-Star MVP. You could see Kelsey Colzer, first overall draft pick, Isabel Cup champion, and kind of going on and on and on the list. But if they could speak out and say something, then it would be okay for the fourth line, third line grinders in the room to speak out and say something too. And also, if those influential voices could say something within the hockey community, then it's okay for a fan to call someone out in the stands and say, hey, what you said is not good enough. That can't live here.
And I think, Anson, and you saying that's, and part of the reason why I joined the Diversity Alliance. Because like you said, if younger kids are hearing this stuff from us, it's going to make them a lot more comfortable in their skin and coming out and actually, battling this stuff. So I think that was a huge reason for, for us creating this alliance. We wanted kids to know that we were always behind them. And, if we're speaking about these things, that you guys can speak about them as well, and we can help combat this together. And eventually make this sport, the utopia that it should be.
Well, this is a great conversation, gentlemen. I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. These conversations are never enough. You have to continue to do more. And I love surrounding myself with people that's smarter than me. And with David and Scott and Frank and Wayne and Bryant, this is what life is all about for me in particular, because I never want to walk in and be the smartest person in the room. And I definitely didn't feel that way today. So I want to thank you guys for joining us.
You're welcome. Anson, if I can just add one more thing. One of the big takeaways that we want from Willie is it's shown and reflected on this screen. This film doesn't get made without Frank Nakano. It doesn't get made without Dave Alward. It doesn't get made without Scott Carmichael and Prodigy. It doesn't get made without Ted Leonsis and Sheila Johnson and Earl Stafford, the ownership group of the Caps, without Rosella Terzi, who was our editor, and Ebian Bihi. There's so many people that formed a coalition, right? With allies and this is before, Black Lives Matter was trending on Twitter, okay? And the same coalitions can be built, right? Find your own coalition, find your own purpose, and build a group of people who care deeply and are committed to making a change.
Well, and lastly too, Brian, where can you find Willie? And also just quickly too, before we wrap, just talk about the educational component that you have in mind with the film.
Sure. Willie right now can be found on iTunes. It can be found on in the Amazon store, in the Amazon Prime store. We got some big announcements coming out next week where it'll be on a major streaming service. So that's going to happen. It's going to be on NHL Network as well. And then we've been fortunate enough to be chosen for a project an initiative called the American Film Showcase, which is sponsored by the U.S. State Department. And so the film is going to travel to 50, 60, 70 countries. We hope to do that in conjunction with Dave and his colleagues in the Canadian government. That's all coming together right now. And we've also been fortunate enough, when we debuted the film at the Hot Docs Film Festival in Toronto, Ontario, the biggest documentary film festival in the world, a year ago, they chose us as one of the very few films that they wrote a curriculum around, a free curriculum that is brilliantly done. We're in the midst of, they've given us permission to use that broadly. And so in conjunction with all of the people that are in this coalition, and I was remiss in not mentioning the NHL, Kim Davis and Gary Bettman were instrumental in making this film. And in conjunction with them going forward, we're going to digitize that curriculum and make it available for free. We will be on a streaming service for free, and we're working with 12,000 schools now, so that over the next 3 years, the curriculum will be available to educators. The film will be available for kids on any device for free, that they'll be able to see it. And we're excited to see it scale that way, and we're excited to follow it with more stories of important people that wherein we seize the narrative. That's next, right? We've put this out there, but next is to seize the narrative and tell our stories. If we are not completely and utterly knowledgeable in our history and changing the tropes and the stereotypes that we've let people define us by, we're wrong. So now it's time to take that next step.
That's awesome. I mean, you clearly don't have to go pro in hockey like Wayne and myself did. You could be a pro in the business world like yourself, Bryant and Frank and David. And the ultimate pro here is Scott. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you again, Scott, with Prodigy Search. And I want to thank Frank as well from JP Morgan Chase. I want to thank David Alward giving his kind words and his insight from a governmental standpoint, and Wayne being a current player. It's always a unique way of looking at things, current player through the lens of, former player. So I want to thank everyone again. So Scott, turn it over to you.
Anson, thank you so much. And again, it's, as I said at the outset, it's an absolute honor to have had the privilege to present this dialogue in this panel today. There's a lot to do and much more to act on, but I can't thank you, Anson, enough. Wayne, Bryant, Dave, Frank, again, it was a deep honor. Prodigy's been deeply, privileged to be a part of the film, Willie. As Brian said, I encourage you all to tell everybody where to find it. And Just as a reminder, the session was recorded today, so it'll be on Prodigy Search's YouTube channel very shortly. Again, I thank each of you. I thank each of the attendees, and I hope we can continue to make a difference out in today's world. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
All the best.